Welcome back to the All Natural Horse Podcast. I'm your host, Laurel, and it's amazing to have you listening in again this week. I'm one of those horse people that really believes that in order to properly advocate for your horse in every scenario possible, you just have to expand your knowledge in the realm of horses, whether that be first aid, hoof care, anatomy, or anything else that falls under the equestrian umbrella. Today, I'm sitting down with Marina Wenner, also known as Gypsy Equestrian, to discuss the importance of continued learning, how she came to find out about positive reinforcement training, as well as her positive reinforcement training program that she currently has available online, which is Positive Horse Training. So let's go ahead and jump into the episode. So I've loved watching your journey, just from being an average horse owner to now having your own positive reinforcement online course. So let's just start at the beginning. How did you first get into riding horses and just horses in general?
Well, kind of like most girls, I started out as a, lover of horses and wanted to get involved and have my own horse and the whole thing. But we lived in Huntington Beach in California, which is pretty city. And so there was a barn, but it was very expensive. And this is like 20 years ago, it was $800 a month, for stall. So it was very much out of our ability. So I did a little bit of riding with friends. And then, every birthday I got a couple riding lessons. And then when I was a teenager, I would bike down to the Huntington Beach Equestrian Center and I would volunteer at the Therapeutic Riding Center. So I was like a sidewalker, and then I kind of built a nice rapport with the gal who was leading that branch of it. And she had me exercise the horses before, because all the horses were donated and a lot of them were probably too much for our program. And so I got to exercise them before, and I had no idea what I was doing though. Like literally looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, I guess it all worked out.
Were you riding or lunging?
Riding. I didn't even learn how to lunge.
Oh, yeah?
I didn't even learn that until I got my first horse, Kazi. So I'm just thinking, well, that was a cool opportunity, but what were they thinking? But yeah, and then it was when I was 26, me and my husband moved to San Juan Island, which is in Washington, and his cousin had horses, and I rode with her for a few months, and like 5 days a week, we trail rode, and then ended up finding Kazi, and that's kind of where my personal journey started with horses. But yeah, it was later in life. It wasn't, it hasn't been really that long, actually.
Awesome. I'm kind of the same way where I did ride all growing up, but I didn't get actual riding education for quite a long time. And then I was 18 when I bought my first horse. So it was as soon as I had my own money, but I was never also the kid who ever had a pony of my own or had leased a horse or anything growing up. So I totally get that. So was there a moment in your horse journey when you said, you know what I know right now just isn't enough and I need to learn more?
Yes, the whole time. I think the further down I get in my horse journey, the more I want to learn. So I think that's interesting. It's like the more you know, the more you want to know. But I started out when I got Kazi, I started out watching just YouTube videos and following some bigger name trainers, just the free resources they had. And then I did some online programs with just the bigger names. I honestly had no idea, who was out there. And at the time too, I think there's more people online anyway. But I also took some riding lessons on her and on other horses. But the last 3 years, and really since my experience with Zareel, my first Mustang, I was like, I have no idea. I don't really understand what is going on. People can tell me the exercises to do and I can copy them to the best of my ability, but actually the understanding of what's actually going on between the horse and, all the body language and all that communication and the different types of learning that horses go through, I really didn't know. And so the last 3 years, and especially the last 2 years, I've been on a huge just diving in and trying to learn everything I can. And it's taken me down a bunch of different rabbit holes for sure. But with the horse training side of things, I've gone down actually both with the negative reinforcement and the positive reinforcement, and taken lots of courses and read tons of books and all of that. But yeah, I think Zareel, my first Mustang, was kind of like oh my gosh, I have no idea. Like I could get away with a lot with my horse that was already trained, but then you have a wild one and it just changed the game for me.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I quote unquote trained my first horse, but he was already halter broken and like he could be around people and stuff like that. I can't imagine going from like this horse has literally never been touched by a person to especially in like the Mustang makeover to like now I'm riding this horse bridleless around a ring with hundreds of people watching and
Yeah.
riding over jumps and with a tarp flying behind me. I can't imagine.
I can't imagine that either because I have not done that.
Yeah, no. But so you mentioned positive and negative reinforcement. I know what those things are, but I'm sure there's plenty of people listening who don't. Can you just explain the four learning quadrants real quick?
Yeah. So I'm like using my hands, but I know this is a podcast that always gets me because I'm so used to videos. But in operant conditioning, there are the four learning quadrants. There's positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. So the idea with the positives and the negatives, those are just simply math terms. They don't mean good or bad. They just positive means addition and negative means subtraction. And then the reinforcement side of it is either like positive reinforcement would be you add something in order to reinforce that behavior. The negative reinforcement would be you take away something in order to reinforce that behavior. And then the punishment is positive punishment is add something to punish the behavior, making it less likely to happen again. Negative punishment is take away something to make that behavior less likely to happen again. So it sounds confusing, but when you put it into like examples, it's a lot easier. But with like positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, which are the most common, well, negative reinforcement is the most common quadrant that we operate in with typically with horse training. And then positive reinforcement, I guess, is like, the second runner up. But positive reinforcement is basically so it's a concept in behaviorism, but it involves the addition, so like I said, of a desirable stimulus to increase the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So it's basically rewarding a behavior to encourage it in the future. And then the negative reinforcement is it's still encouraging. We're trying to encourage a behavior, but we're doing it differently. So it's like tapping on the horse's foot. And then as soon as they stop, we stop that behavior. And then it encourages them, in the future to, when we tap one time, they'll lift their foot. Mm. And positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement often get kind of confused. And I think they can be a little bit confusing. It's easier if you like write it all down. And I'm like it's then listening to the quadrant. It is a little bit easier if you're interested and you don't know. I would recommend checking it out on paper and you can, or like via video so that you can see the differences. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, like my basic explanation.
Yeah. For anybody listening, like if you don't really know much about it, it is easiest if you just think of it in simplest terms because they're kind of intertwined, right? If I'm putting my leg on to ask the horse to go, I release my leg as a negative reinforcement saying, yes, that's right. But when I put my leg on, that's kind of positive punishment for the horse not going forward. Same thing when you're doing positive reinforcement, you're withholding the treat, which would be negative punishment until you give it to them. So just think of it in simplest terms possible. If you're giving them something and you want them to keep doing it, that's positive reinforcement. And just kind of going like that. And that'll kind of keep it less confusing. But yeah, I agree. It's very, very confusing until you kind of break it down. Writing it down is a very good idea.
Yeah. And I think too, like one of the ways that for me, that really helped was writing out a behavior that I wanted and then creating almost like a shaping plan in all the quadrants. And that was, for me, that was really helpful because it was like, oh, okay, it's easier to compare like apples to apples versus, other examples. So anyway, that's a little tip if anybody's wanting to dive in.
So, when was your first experience with positive reinforcement?
Okay, so this is funny because I mean, I think when I was younger, we got a puppy and my mom did some clicker training. So that was probably, but I had no idea what it was. But when I've had rats all throughout my life, but I got them again when I was an adult in Washington when I had Kazi. And I followed this gal called Shadow the Rat on YouTube. And she trains her rats with positive reinforcement to do all types of tricks. Like they play basketball, like they do some pretty complex behaviors.
What? That's so cool.
Yeah, so that's how I actually started to learn about positive reinforcement in its true, like, positive reinforcement nature. Because I had taken a trick training course, but it was really combined reinforcement. So it was like cherry on top. So it was negative reinforcement and then treating the horse after. And so that's what my first thought was with positive reinforcement was. And then this Shadow the Rat, though, was was really my intro to positive reinforcement.
When did you start relating it to horses?
Well, I mean, I kind of had some false starts. So I tried to do that trick training course with Kazi, my Arab, but I didn't learn food manners. And so it kind of went horribly. And so then I stopped and was like, oh, I can't do work with food with horses. But then when I got Zara, actually, I tried to do a little bit with Zariel, but again, I didn't know food manners. So she was pretty muggy and I was using more luring techniques. But then when I got Zara right after the makeover, on my way home from the makeover, I picked up Zara, my new, like my second Mustang. And I was like, I don't want to touch her until I learn a different method because I really didn't enjoy my journey with Zariel. I didn't enjoy those methods that I used. And so then that's when I found Dr. Patricia Barrow-Eyrich, who has a Mustang gentling facility in New Mexico, and she's tamed over 500 Mustangs with mostly positive reinforcement. And so I found her and her book, and that's when I started Zara on our positive reinforcement journey. So that was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, wow. So you that's really neat. What did you think of the program? Was it like exactly what you needed or what?
I think it gave me it gave me a start and it gave me hope, which really was what I needed because at that point, after my experience with Zariel, I was kind of like, if this is how it's done, I don't want anything to do with horses. I was like, that's kind of how I felt because I had just really didn't feel, it wasn't aligned with like what I guess, as I was developing my core values, it just wasn't aligned with those. And so it kind of met me where I was at with just like, oh, wow, there is another way to do it. And I think I approached the manual as like a step-by-step, this is how you do it. And if, like this is what like you do this, your horse does this kind of, almost like just step-by-step. And there's no step-by-step. Like I think we all know that with horses. So for me, I was like putting all my hope in this one like step-by-step training manual. And so then I kind of like lost my way a little bit because I was like, well, I did this and then she didn't do that, And so I was like, so at some points I felt like it's not working, but I didn't understand the principles of it and how to troubleshoot on my own. And I didn't have a mentor at that time. And so I kind of did get lost. But I really, really love Dr. Patricia's program. And now when I look at the manual, I'm like, oh yeah, I can see that. And, but it really, I will say that there's so much good in her manuals. I wish she had more of like an online course because I think that would be really, really beneficial. But for me, it was like hope. She's done it over 500 times and these horses have gone on to be successful athletes and just like that's really what I needed to see. And that was like my first, I guess, experience with people doing it with Mustangs.
Yeah, and I remember you saying after you had started that program that you kind of felt like positive reinforcement was not the complete picture that at least Zara needed, because you felt that she reacted to pressure far too strongly because you didn't use it in your training. When you're looking back on that kind of thought process that you had, do you agree with it still, or do you think that it's coming from a place of where you didn't have as much education on the subject, or do you think you were right? What do you think on that?
It's hard because I still like I agree with what I was saying, but I also think I didn't know what I was exactly what I was doing. So I think I do like my stance currently is that I think that all horses should learn negative reinforcement, and I would like to have all the horses in my care learn negative reinforcement, and I introduce it with tactile cues, and do combined reinforcement. But when I look back on the phase that I was in, like when I said that, that was right before I sent Zara to a trainer. I was just like so lost. And looking back at the reason that like catalyst that had me send her to a trainer, I go, oh yeah, I know what I would do to, fix all of these little things. And also like it came that really happened with when I tried to teach her how to lead. And looking back, it's like she was not ready. Like she's showing every red flag that she's not ready to learn how to lead. And so that was me skipping probably 20 steps in, like what I would have done now. And then being like kind of throwing up my hands and like, oh, okay, she needs to learn pressure. And I do think that if like looking back, like now I do teach, tactile cues, and then it's like a more gentle, I guess, intro for Mustangs to negative reinforcement or to pressure, like responding to pressure. But with her, I had just done a little bit of tactile cues and been like, okay, cool. Now let's, now you should know how to lead. And obviously it didn't go well. And so then I was like, this doesn't work. She needs to, so a lot of it, I like my stance on it is I do think because our world is negative reinforcement. And so like to set up a horse for success, if you're not going to keep them forever, they should learn that, method, because that's likely what they will be, taught. But I think that the way that you could prep a horse for it, like looking back on Zara's story, I could have prepped her a lot better, and then I could have introduced with, tactile cues and done a lot more with that. And then also she just really wasn't ready, like emotionally she was not ready there. So yeah, but that like it's so funny because or not funny, but that time in my life was so dark and alone. I felt like I had just stepped out of like into a new school and I didn't know anybody. And I felt like I was the only one doing this besides my little book that I had. And obviously like now it's like, oh, okay, I know a lot of people who were on the same journey as I was even then. I just didn't know them. And so I think a lot of it too was like, okay, here's the answer. I'll just send her to a trainer and she'll deal with it, And that was kind of me like, I can't do it anymore, So I do regret that decision with everything in my being, but it is what it is.
When you know more, it's easy to regret the decisions that you used to make.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. I think it's really important to give horses life skills that they'll face in the event. Like if you always ride bitless, that's great, but your horse should know how to take a bit in his mouth. If you are a forever home, if you ever die, your horse needs to have certain life skills like leading, like wearing a bridle, like being able to at least have those basic things in place just to give them security in their life. So I do agree with that for sure. And then going back to what you said about skipping steps, let's go back to talking about shaping. So when you're using positive reinforcement, you can't just go at it willy-nilly and expect the world, as you and I probably have both learned. And I feel like when you're using negative reinforcement, I don't know if it's just because it's more widespread and more easy to understand, but I feel like you don't have to be as thought out with it as you do with positive reinforcement, and making that switch can be difficult. So can you kind of talk about what shaping is and approximation and all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So whenever I'm going to teach a new behavior with a horse, then I'm going to okay, when I'm operating in my best self, I'm going to sit down and write out a shaping plan. And really what shaping is basically sculpting this behavior. So I'm going to break it down into a bunch of little tiny approximations, what we call it in positive reinforcement. And they're tiny, tiny little steps. And then I'm going to start at the first, okay, what's the very basic thing that, if I'm going to teach a horse how to self-halter, what's the first thing that they need to be able to do? Well, okay, besides food manners and all the foundations, they need to target the halter. And so that's step one. And then they need to, target the nose band and then stick their nose in there and hold it in there and keep their head low. And then there's just this whole list of things. And we start at the very beginning. And if we don't get greedy trainer syndrome, then we can just little by little shape out those, by shaping, I mean in the beginning, it's okay for them to, fling their head and do this and do that. But then we want to shape it, create that behavior to be really nice and finessed where they stick their nose in there and they hold their head low for us to put their ears through and, clip the chin strap. So the shaping plans are really, really important to teach the horse each tiny little behavior because there's a lot that actually goes into every behavior. But when we see it finished, we're like, oh yeah, that looks easy. And so oftentimes, we can skip steps and then the behavior falls apart. And then we're like, oh, it can be like, oh, this doesn't work, or my horse isn't getting it, or you can get stuck. But breaking down whatever the big or the end behavior is into a bunch of tiny little steps and then sticking to that plan, that shaping plan, and then adjusting it, you always have to adjust. But it makes it, it pulls it into bite-sized pieces for the horse and for the trainer to just focus on this little piece. And then it all kind of comes together at the end and it's beautiful.
So have you seen the show? I feel like I'm the only equestrian who likes this show. Have you seen the show Spirit Riding Free?
Yes, I have. Because I have nieces and nephews. Okay. So I have seen it with them.
So yes, I am an adult and I do like the show.
Love it.
But in the show, she teaches Spirit, or maybe he just does it, I don't know, to lift his foot up to as a mounting block type thing. If you wanted to teach that to a horse, how would you shape that behavior with positive reinforcement?
Wait, so he puts his foot on a mounting block or she steps on his foot?
She steps on his foot.
Wow. Is that even okay?
I don't know if it's even possible.
Let's just say if I was a cartoon. Yeah, if I was a cartoon, how would I do it? Okay, so what I would do is so she steps on his hoof when he picks up his foot and then swings on his back. That's amazing.
Exactly. Isn't that fun? Wouldn't that be cool if that was possible?
So cool. Okay, so how I would do that is I would teach a knee target first. So I teach my horse to pick up their foot for a knee target. That's how I start with hoof handling because that's one of the best ways I found to actually use positive reinforcement versus combined reinforcement. So teach the knee target and then switch to a catch and hold. So ask for knee and then I would catch and hold their foot. And then, click and reward for that. And then I would ask them, for foot because I transfer the cue to foot. And so I lean down and they pick up their foot. And then I would teach the countdown. So countdown is one of a really foundational behavior that's amazing, where basically it's you counting backwards 3, 2, 1, and then, click and reward. And then you can build that up to 10, 9, or 20, or, really it could be anything, any number. And it just teaches the horse to continue doing the behavior that you're doing right now until you hear 3, 2, 1, click, and then you can, set your foot down. So that's how I teach hoof handling. So I would have the horse hold their foot up. And then, if I was a cartoon, would then put my foot on top of their foot and click there. And then I'd start to add weight. And I'd ask hoof. The end behavior would look like I would say hoof. They lift their foot, hold it up. I stick my foot on there, swing up, and then I click and reward and feed from their back. If I was lucky from Spirit Riding Free.
But even inside of all of those steps, there's 100 micro steps, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about like knee targeting, just breaking that down, what would be the first step of doing that?
For me, I do where I just put my hand like an inch away from their knee. And the second they shift their weight to the opposite leg, I click. And then I do it again and again. And then most horses, if they already have a foundation with positive reinforcement, the knee target comes really quickly because they're going to try behaviors. They'll like throw different behaviors at you. Like, is this what you wanted? Is this what you wanted? And so I find the knee target happens really quickly, but I'll just start really close. And then with my horses where I'm trying to get like a really high knee target, because then I want to transfer it to like the Spanish walk or, want it to be really impressive, then I just keep moving my hand further and further away.
And then it like just continues from there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I find with the knee target, it like horses like to paw. And so I feel like they, or they can, a lot of them do. And so it's one of those behaviors. It's like, it's anatomically easy for them to do. And so like, it's way easier than the hip target. Like that's but one of those body targets that's like, if somebody needs a win, I'm like, teach the knee.
That's funny you mentioned pawing because that's like the first thing that I taught my horse. And
on accident or on purpose?
well, no, on purpose. But at the time in my head, I was like, this is positive reinforcement because I would tap his leg. And then when he would, lift his leg, I would give him a treat. But now looking back on it, like that was definitely negative reinforcement with a cherry on top.
I think that's how most of us get started.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you have to kind of think about it and say, how can I do this without touching them at all, right?
Yeah. Or even like the like physical pressure of, because I have I work a lot with people who have wild Mustangs. And so even if you're like your hand, let's say it's like, well, I'm not touching them, I'm not putting any pressure, but it's like, well, there's like the intention and the way that your shoulders are, looking at them and your eyes are looking at them, that's actually a lot of pressure. And so even if we, like for me, like with the hoof or the knee target, it's like if my horse is moving away from my knee, then I'm like, okay, then I need to, or not my knee. If the horse is moving their knee away from my hand and not trying to touch it, then I'm like, okay, they don't feel comfortable with me even being there. So like, cause that's one thing that, yeah, like, cause you know how you can oftentimes be behind the drive line and even just look at your horse's hip if you wanted to yield the hindquarters, and they'll like naturally move away from that pressure. And that's just like it's still pressure, it's just not physical. So I find that a lot. Just in training, like it's easy to kind of do that accidentally, which I don't even hold that like all pressure. I still use negative reinforcement, and it's important to teach, but it's just interesting when you're like, I'm trying to do something with positive reinforcement and you see yourself using the other quadrants, and you're like, oh yeah, how do I do this? How would I do this if it was just positive reinforcement? It's actually can be a little harder than it seems at times, especially for certain behaviors.
Yeah, it's kind of like a brain teaser, but it's fun once you figure out like something that works. My thing is, I'm not a positive reinforcement trainer, but I have tried a lot of it in the past.
Mm-hmm.
My thing is with my horse, and maybe you have some experience with horses like this, is he does know manners, but he has a lot of food anxiety. And I can just see it on his face that he is a lot more anxious once I start doing positive reinforcement versus steady and not increasing negative reinforcement. So are you the kind of person that would say if a horse is uncomfortable with it, that's okay and we can stick with what he likes? Or are you the kind of person who would say, well, there's a reason for that, he can work through it, and this is what you would recommend? What would be your, I guess, diagnosis of something like that?
Well, I mean, I think it would depend on the owner. Because like, let's just say, for example, you're like, oh yeah, my horse has anxiety around food and I'm not interested in doing positive reinforcement. like I like doing non-escalating negative reinforcement. And they'd be like, oh, that's great, you know? But if you're like, I really wanted to do positive reinforcement, but my horse is really anxious when I bring out food, and he already knows food manners and he'll do food manners, but he's still like, there's a lot of pent up anxiety there. But I want to do positive reinforcement, then I would be like, well, let's explore that and work through the food anxiety. I have my little, I guess she's a mare now, Zinfandel, has a lot of food anxiety. And I, for a while, was like, I can't do positive reinforcement with her. Like, she is so easily frustrated. And like, she'll do it, like you're saying with your horse. She'll like do the head turn away and, but her ears are pinned and she's upset. And it's like this kind of, it's stress. And she's showing all of her, her stress signals too she isn't like flaring her nostrils, but, she's got tight lips and she's frustrated. And so I, for a long time, was like, okay, I can't do positive reinforcement with her. And then, the more and more I got into it, and I'm like, no, I really want to figure this out because one, I just enjoy positive reinforcement way more than I do negative reinforcement. And so I was like, okay, if she's going to be my horse, then we're going to try and figure this out together. And so what I did with her was I spent like just a week where I did a few, like, so I would take her into the round pen at the barn, and like I would give her a soaked alfalfa. So she'd be like very, like she just had, because I only use alfalfa and sometimes senior in my mixes for treats. And so I gave her basically what I would be giving her before in our sessions. And then, so she, had already eaten breakfast and she had her little alfalfa mash. And then I went in for a session and we just did like really high reward and, easy behaviors. But a longer session, like 10 minutes, which normally I don't do that long of a session with a horse that's in the beginning stages. And then, left her in the round pen, came back 20 minutes later and did it again. And then 20 minutes later and then did it again and then put her away. And I did that for like a week. And by the end of the week, she was like old hat, like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, I'm excited to train, but she didn't have the anxiety anymore. And it comes back like right now I'm in a little season with her where she's, kind of in that like food anxiety. She's also the low man on the, like in my herd. And so anytime like food comes out, that it kind of like is like, I need, this special resource. But, for her, if I have the other horses like far away, there's no thought of her. Even on the other side of the fence, she still like gets stressed when other horses come around. And she's been that way since the beginning, like kind of food aggressive, just since I got her, and I got her as a yearling. But Shauna Karish, who is like, big positive reinforcement trainer, has talks about like the food anxiety with horses. And she explains it as like, when you tell your kids like, oh, we're going to go to Disneyland, and they're like, oh my gosh, Disneyland, it's like amazing, I'm so excited. And they have all this pent up excitement for it. And then, but the next day you're like, we're going to go to Disneyland. And they're like, oh, woohoo. And then after like 10 days in a row of going to Disneyland, they're like, cool, I'm excited. But it's not like it was, the first few days. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case with every single horse with that either frustration or food anxiety. But Zinfandel is one that I've worked with that through. And I'm not saying that it's completely gone either, but that is something that I saw that really helped her. And that's just for her specific case. But I think it really is going to depend on the owner. Like if I had a client that came to me and said, I really want to do this and I want to like go through all the steps of like sorting through this, then I would be like, yeah, but if it's somebody who's like, I don't want to, then and you feel like, okay, I don't want to like really put him through this, or I don't want to have to, it's not that important to me to, I guess, add stress and for you trying to figure it out. But I do think it can be worked through, but it's just if you want to, so it's kind of those trade-offs.
Yeah. Yeah, just kind of depending on what your goals are. That makes sense. Yeah. Do you have like a mentor in positive reinforcement, somebody that you can go to, or are you just like coming up with all of your training methods yourself? What is the, I guess, the backing behind your knowledge that made you say, I have enough knowledge now that I can start a course and start helping other people?
Ooh, good question. Okay, so as far as the mentor side of things, I have Bree with Equine Haven. She's someone that she works with. She has the Facebook page called Positive or Wild Training Wild Mustangs with Positive Reinforcement. So I have her as a mentor. So I have like a monthly thing with her. And she's been amazing just to kind of be there for me in more of like the emotional side of things. And then have you heard of Felicity Davies? I'm not in a current, okay, so I'm in one of her courses again that starts in May. And I just kind of sign up for her group coaching, and I've done a few of them. And she has been she does negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement as well, but just as kind of like that mentor, like also business mentor, but horsemanship mentor and, shoulder to cry on kind of thing. And just someone to process with. So I would say like mentorship wise, I have those two amazing women in my life. And then as far as like the resources and everything, I just have like a huge long list of all the different courses that I've taken and the books that I've read. But I think for me, what pushed me to this spot of like, okay, I think I'm ready to teach this was when I was at the barn, I had a lot of people approaching me and asking me to give them lessons. They're like, oh, if my horse could stand at the mounting block, that would like change my life and all those things. So I started working with people just at my barn that I was at. And then I was in my program with Felicity, and she's like, Marina, you're doing all this stuff, like with people at the barn, like you should create an online course. And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like it's really vulnerable to put yourself out there. And she's like, yeah, but you're doing it and you have your YouTube channel. And like, I think it would go, like, I think you would feel really, excited about doing that. And so that's kind of how I decided like, okay, yeah, I want to do this. But it was after working with people in person that I decided, okay, I think I can do this. And then as far as like shaping plans and everything like that, like what I've developed, a lot of the things that I teach are things like, none of it is rocket science or something that like, oh, nobody's ever heard of the countdown or no one's ever heard of targeting. But I just like create the shaping plans that I created were just, I sat down, rethought back, because a lot of things I had already taught my horses how to do, and just like thought back to, okay, this is how I did it. And then I used the reel actually as my like show my horse of like, okay, look at the process of it and like, show the whole process. Cause Zara already knew a lot of the things and Zareel didn't really know much at all. And so I videoed her whole journey and kind of like tweaked the shaping plans as needed. And so that's kind of how I've developed that. When it comes to like the methods. And then like resource wise too, like Hertha James, I've never talked to her before in real life. Like I've interacted with her a little bit on Facebook, but she has, I think like 10 positive reinforcement books and they are so freaking good. And I don't know why I had never heard about her for I never heard her name. And then all of a sudden on Amazon, I saw a book and I bought it and it was like the best book on positive reinforcement. And then I read her next one and she's just so thorough. And she was I think elementary school teacher, and I was an elementary school teacher, so I really vibed with her style. And she doesn't have any courses or anything, but she's got really good resources for people who want to like know the back end of everything. So even though she doesn't know who I am, I would consider her one of my good friends because I've spent hours and hours and hours with her in her books. So yeah. That's like a little gist of like when I decided. I also had such a hard time in my positive reinforcement journey, and I felt so alone. And like the amount of tears that I cried being like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to do this. And like, I want to, but I don't know how. And I feel alone and I feel stuck. And I just felt like, I didn't feel like there were that many resources available. And then having kind of come through that and seen other people be in the same position where they like start out really gung-ho with their Mustang and they're like, I'm going to do this. This is the way. And then they get stuck and it's like, that's it. And then it's over. And I'm like, I want to meet people where they're at right there of like, okay, let me emotionally support you and then support you with shaping plans and video feedback and all of that. Like, that's what I needed at that time. And so I hadn't seen anybody do what what I was doing. And I was like, I think this is something that it gets me excited because then there's more, like specifically Mustangs are my heart, and more Mustangs being able to, have that gentle foundation, as they come into this new world. So that's, really, I guess, my passion behind like why I started my little positive horse training program.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's really heartening for a lot of people that there are so many resources out there right now and so many online courses just on a variety of things. And we were talking about this a little bit before, but I think it's so important to, as an equestrian, try and diversify your knowledge base as much as, just as much as possible in every area possible, whether that's hoof care, training, nutrition, saddle fit, all of it. It's so important because in order to be an advocate for your horse, you have to have at least some knowledge in every area of of your horse's life. And it is really amazing the number of programs and books and people who are just kind and willing to help that are out there to help people who are looking for it. And I think you and I both were talking about how we were both looking to get like take all these courses and stuff because it's not just positive reinforcement for you, right?
No, like for the courses and stuff that I take or want to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, it's like hardly any positive reinforcement courses that I have taken compared to Liberty and negative reinforcement and, like I'm in an equine taping and body work and hoof care. Yeah, I feel like you said, I think it's so important to have at least basic knowledge of everything so that you can pick the right farrier and double check their work. And same thing, just like saddle fit and body work and everything. I think it's such a gift to your horse and every horse that you come in contact with if you have a basic knowledge in all these areas. It can be really overwhelming though. So like a note to anyone listening, if you're like, oh no, now I need to get into all of these things, just pick one thing that you're interested in and kind of start, get a book on it or find a podcast episode and kind of slowly dive in and then, find the next thing and just kind of dabble in a few and you'll find your way.
Yeah. There's a lot to learn for sure. And a good horse person knows that there's always more to learn.
Yes.
Especially nowadays as science is, coming out with all of these things about how the way that we've thought about horses for centuries has been wrong and the way that we've, thought that they worked has been, different, and we're always finding out new things about horse behavior. And yeah, but learning can happen anywhere, just like the people you follow on Instagram. You may think that there's no one out there who, I don't know, trains horses to play soccer, and that's all you've ever wanted is to train your horse to play soccer. I guarantee you there's someone on Instagram who does that and who shares their journey with that. But yeah, but whether you're doing something just for fun or just to increase your knowledge in general, it's out there for you. I think it's so cool that just that you've gone from just somebody who was so lost, as so many people have been, to someone who is now helping others find their way through something that they're lost in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a lot of people like. I'm sure for you too, like you probably, the way that, I don't know exactly your story with coming up with your product, but like, oh, wouldn't this be amazing if And then you look around and you don't see it. And so you're like, okay, then maybe that's me.
Yeah.
So I think that's like how a lot of beautiful businesses are built, or programs, or, dreams or visions for the future horse world of like, wouldn't it be cool if, and it's like, if you ever have that thought, that might be a little like tap on your shoulder of maybe this is for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. Like, and you don't have to be the first person to do it either. Even if everyone you know is doing it too, there are certain things that are just worth knowing, and pursuing knowledge it's a worthwhile thing just on its own.
Yeah, and I think too, when like, if you feel that like tap on your shoulder of like, oh yeah, this is something I'd want to do, but you see, 20 other people doing it, and it like, I think there's so much room for everybody to become, whether it's just like hobby wise, or actually, pursuing something as as like a career. Because with online, even just like with online courses, because that's, something that I'm doing, is there's just so many personalities that different people vibe with. Like if there was only one person that taught positive reinforcement or whatever, liberty, whatever it is you want to learn, you might not vibe with them, or you do for a while and you soak up all the things and then you want to work with someone else. And so I think just having that mentality of like, okay, there's a lot to learn and there's a lot of people to learn from, and you can get amazing gems from each, person that you work with or follow, even on Instagram. Like you were saying earlier, I've learned so many things from Instagram, and yeah, I'm just like, wow, it actually, sometimes I'm wasting time, but sometimes I'm learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really is true that everybody, well, I say there's some people who probably shouldn't be teaching anybody how to train horses and shouldn't touch
Yes.
horses with the 10-foot pole. But most people most people have at least something that you can learn from. And people will look at these courses and say, "Well, I like a lot about the course, but there's just some things that I don't like, and I'm just gonna ditch this whole thing altogether." And
Mm.
but there's a lot you can still learn, and that's how people come up with their own training plans. Is it didn't just out of the blue one day say, "I'm gonna learn how to train horses, and I'm gonna start right now." They learned from other people, and they learned from a lot of different people, and came up with something that felt right to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a process, like going from I know nothing to now I've gained all of these different pieces of knowledge from different people. I'm putting it together. What was it like going from, you have all these separate things, and then ultimately creating your program and putting all of that together?
Yeah, I mean, for I guess like the different courses that I had been in during that time when I was kind of finding my own way, a lot of it was just for like the accountability and the support, because I knew the direction that I wanted to go, and I knew enough about positive reinforcement to not have to follow somebody else's shaping plans to be able to create my own. And so then the courses that was in was really for accountability and this, and like the support side of things. Like I'm saying, like community, because I didn't have anybody else in my community doing what I was doing, and so it felt pretty lonely. So I outsourced that part. I had all like a bunch of people online to support me. So I had already created shaping plans and done all these things with Zara, and or I'd created shaping plans, I guess, like in my brain, and a little bit of jotting the notes down, but not enough to like, hey, here's a shaping plan, follow this. So I had done all that already though with Zara, and then was like, well, it was really Felicity Davies that was like, Marina, you need to share this with the world. And so she pushed me for a few months. Like she kept reaching out to me and saying, Marina, I really think you should, even when I wasn't in her mentorship program. And then I finally was like, okay. And so then she helped me create my course, and just like I bounced, ideas off of her. And I ended up taking another one of her classes. But I kind of already found my way of like, yeah, this is the way that I do it, just by being out there and putting in the hours working with my horses. And then the course side of things it was a lot. It was like one of the hardest things that I've done, is trying to like pull all of these things and then package it. And you're like, what if I'm missing something, or what if I'm, but the fact that I guess the piece of my program where I do like video feedback and the coaching side of things, and I have the calls, like the weekly calls, it does give me a little bit more flexibility, because if there's something that comes up, I'm there. I can answer the question, or I can tweak things for, specific students. But it was a lot to, put all your thoughts into one place and make it understandable and package it for somebody who doesn't have 20 hours to just sit there and, every day and listen to you ramble. It's like, it has to be concise and doable and all the things. So it was a lot of work, but it really got me very crystal clear while I was doing it, of like, this is how, just kind of like solidifying, like more and more getting like, I guess, like shaping out my own plans and methods and like how I do things and seeing those patterns. So, but yeah, it was a labor of love for sure.
So give me like a quick pitch of your program. So what do people learn in your program? How long does it last? What would people expect if they listen to this and are like, oh, I want to check that out?
Okay, so I have a 8-week intensive positive reinforcement program. I have like a level 1 and a level 2. So both of these currently are 8-week programs. So in level 1, which I'll just talk about level 1, students will learn how to teach food manners and protected contact, and then inside the pen with their horse. And then duration, which basically looks like patience. They'll learn the countdown, which is, we kind of talked about that. Targeting, teaching their horses to target their body parts, which eventually we shape that out and use that later for side passing. Leading at liberty, the backup, self-halter, and then stationary targets. So the way that the program works, those are the things that we teach in it, and of course, or that the tasks that you'll learn how to teach your horse. And then I go over classical conditioning, operant conditioning, consent in horses, body language, just giving people a foundation of how to learn how to read their horse, because that is a big piece with positive reinforcement, and in general with horse training. But so there's that video library, that's all on Kajabi. And then we have a weekly meeting where it's a Zoom call, and we kind of talk about how our week went. Like, each person gets a time to share and ask questions and really prepare for like the next week. And it's a good time to kind of connect with other people in the group. It's a very small group so far it's been all women. And then that we have a messaging support app, which this is one thing that people are like, oh, I don't really, like, and when they first start the program, they're like, oh yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm really in it for just the video library. And then the thing that everybody loves is the messaging support, because so our Zoom calls right now are on Monday, and then throughout the week and the weekend, people are uploading their homework, which is just videos of them training the tasks, or in their process of training the tasks. And then they get video feedback, and we have on Fridays we have like a reflection time where people submit their reflection questions. And I do challenges inside. Like, we just finished a challenge week this last week, and I gave away a treat pouch to a couple of the people who participated in the challenge, and just by like a raffle. And it's really the main, like, one of the things that people join for is to learn positive reinforcement and like how to implement it, and then to get the coaching. But the community that is built inside the group is amazing. And like, my first level 1, those gals like have their own little Zoom call that they do like once a month, and they meet up, and it's really sweet to see them, carry on their friendships. But the big piece with my program is the video feedback, because it's easy to, and this is something like when I look back on my YouTube channel and I'm like seeing me, trying to do something, and I'm like, oh man, I look at it and go, okay, if I tweak this, tweak that, tweak this, then this would, the whole thing would most likely go better. But it's just something that we think are like, oh yeah, it's like when you're riding a horse and your instructor's like, all right, I need you to breathe. And you're like, I am breathing. And then you see like a video of yourself and you're like, oh, I wasn't breathing. But it's just kind of that like connection, like brain body connection. And so being able to see that on video, it's really good for the students. And then also is helpful for me to understand when they're like, oh, my horse did this, then I can be like, oh yeah, okay, let's tweak this. Or, or like, oh yeah, it's because your shoulders were pointed at their hip. That's why they moved. Or, that kind of thing. So it's really, really helpful to kind of get people out of their comfort zone by videoing themselves and then help them to not get stuck in, in the same spot. Like being able to, for them to like, oh, I had a problem today. They upload the video and then I message them back, within a few hours. And it's like, okay, cool. I'll try that next time I go out. Oh, yay, it worked. And that's like what I needed. And so I think I really created this for like past Marina because like this is what I needed with Zara. And yeah, so that's kind of like a long version of my channel or my program for level 1.
No, that's awesome. I think that's really cool because probably most people who are going to be in your program are either, they have their horses alone at their house, or they board and they're the only positive reinforcement person there, likely. So yeah, I'm sure most people are missing that community aspect. So I can see how important that would be, because if everybody around you is doing the exact opposite kind of training maneuvers, yeah, I can imagine that would feel really lonely. So if somebody wants to, learn more about you, learn more about your course, or just kind of check you out, where can they do that?
Okay, so I have my Instagram is one of the best ways to, if somebody wants to reach out or like get to know me almost on a daily basis. It's Positive Horse Training is my Instagram handle, positive.horsetraining. And then my website, if you're interested in the course, it's positive.horse. And then of course I have my YouTube channel, Gypsy Equestrian, which I post on irregularly right now, but that just kind of has, if you want to see what I'm talking about with my training with Zara or Zareel and look back on all those things, then you can kind of check that out. But that is not up to date. I do have a couple of videos of what it was like in the first round of Positive Horse Training. And so that's pretty cool because you'll get to see most of the students working with their horses and the things that they learned. And that video is on YouTube as well.
Huge thanks to Marina for coming on the show. It was such a fun conversation. If any of you listening are interested in her positive reinforcement course, definitely go and check that out. And if you enjoyed listening to this conversation with her, I really think you'll like our other episodes, including last week's where we spoke with Linda from Tapestry Equine Products about the importance of comfortable tack for your horse. I also recommend that if you're interested in expanding your relationship with your horse and getting those fairy tale moments you only see in movies, check out our ebook, which you can find on our website, AHLERI.com. That's AHLERI.com. You can also see on there some of the equine mental health products we have available, including our all-natural, science-backed, scent-based, non-drowsy calmer that applies straight to your horse's nose. Thanks for listening in, and I hope to see you here next time.